Ons was dienspligtiges en staande die manne en vroue, die hele SAW en seunsbroederskap, wie vanaf die 60er, deur die 70er en tot die 80er jare op die grens en elders ons mense probeer verdedig en beskerm het. Om die kampvuur gesels ons oor die lag en die huil, die stap en die hardloop, die drill en die marcheer, die oefen en die ontspan, die werk en die speel, die sweet en die rus, die vasbyt en die jiphou, die val en die opstaan, die baklei en die weghardloop, die suksesse en die mislukkings, maar ook die bloei en die doodgaan, die treur en die wroeging en veral die onthou. Ons onthou ons helde en gevalle makkers en die gewone soldate en polisiemanne, van troep tot korporaal tot sersant tot offisier, wit, swart, bruin en geel, wie saam onder die oranje, blanje, blou gedien het in Suidwes en Angola, in Rhodesia en Mosambiek en in Suid-Afrika self. Om die kampvuur vertel ons hulle stories, maar laat ons hulle ook self terugdink en pyns en onthou. Om die kampvuur, aangebied deur Willem Ratte.
Good evening, Slade.
Evening, Willem. Good to be here with you.
Yeah, let's start with your beginning. How did you end up in the Air Force? Where do you come from? What's your background? And so on.
Okay, I was born in Johannesburg, grew up on the goldfields in the Free State, so that would be Virginia and Valcom. My dad was a civil engineer, so we moved around a bit, and then because of that, I ended up at boarding school in Kimberley, and then my last 2 years down in Kloof in Natal, so I got around quite a bit. Then when national service came up, obviously I was seriously thinking of flying. Applied for pilot's course, was not accepted. So I still had to go do, obviously, national service. And again, every 6 months you can apply. I applied again. In my national service year, I ended up at Devon as a radar operator. So it was still pretty interesting. And second attempt, and it happened to quite a few of us, got in. So
What year was that?
So 69 was my national service year. 1970 was pilot's course. And that we got wings in July 71. So it was 18 months. So again, it was 18 months of basically being treated like a trooper, not allowed out. You needed passes on weekends, not out at night, still drilling, still being chased around. But, we all have good memories and we still have great friendships from those times.
Was that at Donata?
That was at Donata. I was still the old vintage that trained on the Harvards. The interesting thing is, a lot of guys, or most of us, I think, you're thinking Mirage when you join the Air Force. The interesting thing is your instructors are pulled from all the squadrons, maritime, transport, fighters, choppers. And it's from them that you start getting an idea of the actual, what sort of work they do. And I thought the Mirages sounded good, but helicopters certainly sound more interesting. So I decided that's the way I wanted to go. I had a great instructor too, which helped a lot. I'm sure it's the only reason I got through. Was a guy, late guy. He's passed away now, Eric Schmullian, for most of the way. And the Air Force then, in their wisdom, sent most of our pilots course. We were 46 that started, 31 got wings. And if I remember correctly, it was 11. We were sent off to Potchefstroom to fly Cessnas, working with the Army and the artillery guys.
Before you go on, can you tell us a bit about the Harvard training? The actual, now you are sort of rookie, you haven't flown before, now you're going to get onto an aircraft. What's it like?
It's pretty intimidating. That Harvard is a beast, and it was in our Air Force for 55 years. It was been used as a trainer before the war. So she was an old-fashioned girl. She had, she had some habits, and she would bite you, and if you weren't careful. So, but obviously a great basic trainer, because turned out pretty good pilots. But yeah, it was intimidating, when that big radial engine starts and coughs, and the first time you open that throttle, then you realize you better command this thing. You better be on top of it, because it's got a mind of its own. You get through it somehow. I look at Harvard now, and I still think, how the hell did I ever manage to, as an innocent young kid, actually. But anyway, we had good training and good instruction, without a doubt.
Any near misses or interesting episodes from that Harvard training?
No, not, besides scaring myself a good few times and getting slightly lost one night on night navigation. Yeah, I managed to get through it without sort of much mishap. I never damaged or, obviously gave my instructors a few gray hairs, that I'm sure of. But yeah, you got through it, and getting your wings, of course, that's a great day, day you don't forget. Like your wedding day, Same sort of thing.
So they sent you off to Cessnas first.
Off to Potchefstroom, my Afrikaans improved there greatly, because there's not too many English girls there in Potchefstroom. Lots of girls at the varsity, of course. And then did a lot of border time, because we were used a lot, and in fact cross-border. So I'd already, by the end of 71, in fact, I did Christmas, New Year 71, based in Angola, a place called Sapa Pinto, now known as Monongwe.
That was when the Portuguese were still in power.
The Portuguese still were, very much. They still had all their troops there. It was a pioneering country, that southeastern part of Angola. The Portuguese called it the land at the end of the earth. Pristine, unspoilt. You fly over rivers there, you could see the fish in the water. It was an unfenced Kruger Park, the herds of elephant, buffalo, zebra, huge herds, huge. It's gone now, of course, or mostly gone. And you're young, you don't realize that you've seen something very special. I look back now, and I was back there flying in that area 2 years ago on safari, and never realizing one day it's going to be, a big battle area for us. It was just a very special treat.
What were you doing? I mean, was there a war going on? What were you as South Africans doing in Angola at that stage?
Well, the Portuguese were fighting their terrorist thing, not very well, I don't think. There are a lot of reasons for that, and Kaas van der Wals, and I think a few other guys have written books on that. It was sort of low key, and our guys were being pulled across every so often. The helicopters would go in, wearing Portuguese uniform. We were as well, and doing operations. Whereas the Cessna was permanently based there, and it was just used for liaison. So the Portuguese brigadier normally would use it if needed. Plus, we were doing twice a week ration runs, and odds and ends, the odd medevacs. So it was really a flag waving exercise. I think it was, we had normally 4 guys in our house. We had our own little house in the town, a signaller, normally about a staff sergeant, a commandant who was known as Senlo, senior liaison officer, and then normally a 2IC, about a major. Dave Snyder's is one I remember. And they did their bit with, the Portuguese army. They gave us a driver. He lived in our house. He had the best job in Angola, I think, because he drove us. They drive on the wrong side of the road there. But he was well treated. And we used him mainly to go down to the quartel, which is their canteen. They used to get the booze at discount prices, without tax or, whatever the military got. So we had quite a supply going, because then, of course, boys back in Runtu, we were based in Runtu in those days. They were putting in big orders for all the exotic liqueurs and so on. So we helped the local economy there as well. Yeah, so that's what we did. The Christmas was certainly, and New Year was very interesting. And then that's through that I met my wife to be, which was
Yeah, tell us about meeting your wife. How did that happen?
well, the house we had, our Senla house, and I saw it when I was back in Angola in 2018. The 2 doors away was this family, and they had some young daughters, and Stella was the one. She spoke pretty good English. And in those days as well, we were flying in movies from Runtu, and about every second night we would be showing a movie, and we would have guests, and generally she was certainly a guest. Pretty little girl in the town, spoke English. 2 doors away, sisters came sometimes, her brother, friends, various people. But of course, when I was only a second lute, so, she got the main seat in front of the screen, the commandant on one side, the major on the other side, and the Air Force lute, the staff, and our houseboy working. We still worked the projector at the back, and we had our own little party. We had these 2 falling over this girl. Anyway, about the time of my first tour, the end of the tour, coincidentally, she was coming to South Africa with her dad. He needed some medical treatment. And she'd arranged with the major, or Dave Snyder's, that they do 3 months tours there. So they get to know the people far better than we did. We were rotating out of Runtu. So, out of a 6-week tour, I think we would get 2 weeks, or it was something like that. We were 3, I think, and we shared it. Whereas they were there for much longer. And they'd made a social arrangement, and I had done the same with David, because I knew his brother from school. And then he suggested we combine it, and we both all went back more or less at the same time. So on my first bush leave, I took her out. We had 1 or 2 family functions. She hit it off really well with cousins of mine that just had a baby. And I'd already volunteered for the bush. I was only back for the 2 weeks, and off I went. And her dad eventually couldn't make it. He got held up with business, so he postponed. And she stayed on for like another, I think it was 6 weeks or something. But she was having such a good time. She was people looking after her. And she was staying in a hotel, and my cousin eventually said, "That's nonsense, pull in." And she had a glorious time. My family's quite large and very outgoing and friendly. And I didn't know any of this. I only found out when I got back. So, yep. And then, I went back. I did 1 or 2. And then, in fact, Angola, Rhodesia, I was doing more in Rhodesia, just the way it worked out. And then, of course, the next thing, they had their revolution. And, we lost all contact.
It was not in Angola. She was in Angola when the revolution happened.
She was in Angola. What had happened is, when it got so shaky, they tried it. Her dad was very well liked. He was actually saved by, I think it was a FNLA guy. But it was that time when all the movements were trying to take command, and they had 1 or 2 bad incidences. And then they sent out the wives and kids. And then there was one particular incident, and it's a bit close to home, but Stella got herself involved in a nasty altercation, and it was that bad that the next morning her dad had her flown out. He had arranged an aircraft, and the guy flew in. She had to get through roadblocks to get to the airport. They managed to talk their way through, and because of that, they knew she couldn't take too much bags or anything. The cover story was she had to go and be flown to a doctor. This pilot flew her into Runtu, taxied in, opened the door, and let her get out. And straight off, took off, just literally dumped her in South Africa. And she bumped straight into various guys, including, I think, Delville Linford, who had done long tours there and knew the family really well. All surprised to see her. She explained the situation, and they said, okay, come with us. And they took her straight to General Lutz. So she ended up working alongside General Lutz's office for quite a while. That's another story on its own, everything that went on there. Wonderful old man. I went to his funeral a few years ago. Real old school gentleman, I must say. And still thinks highly, highly of him. It was very good. He eventually got her whole family across, because then she'd lost track of what was going on. Then it exploded. Then shortly after her thing, then they sent the kids out. Hers came first. Kids, women out, and then her dad and brother were in two separate towns when it just went crazy, and they both headed for Luanda. The father he got warned. A guy came to and said, look, the MPLA are on their way. They're going to pull him out, make some accusation, shoot him. He was sort of prepared, grabbed a weapon, grabbed what he could out the back door, made his way out of town, managed to get Luanda, managed to get a flight to Lisbon, because that's where the family had been sent. Her brother Edgar now, when he got to Luanda, the flight was going to Brazil. He said, well, it doesn't matter, I just got to get out. And he ended up, his story there too is just an amazing story. In the streets, he happened to meet someone who knew a hunting partner of his dad's, and this guy took him under his wing, ended up running his farm for him. And from there, he pulled the family from Portugal. They weren't very happy there. The Portuguese dropped their colony, and the father was quite unhappy about that. And then when General Lutz had done a lot of work for her and found out where they were all okay, and then she went across to Rio, had a big family in Durban, and came back and told General Lutz, they settled and they're doing okay, but their hearts are still in Africa. So next thing, he arranged for the whole lot of them to come across. They all ended up working in the military. Her dad and her brother. And all did the brother did some interesting work for us as well. And Stella, because of all of this, she then ended up, when the general retired, she ended up with DCC. It's in the books now. It's in the public knowledge, I guess. They got raided by the Goldstone Commission, and they tried to intimidate her, which I knew when she started telling me that part of the story wasn't going to work. We were wary because our phone was tapped, and we picked up on that. This panel tried to intimidate her, and she handled them. You need to know my wife. She's quite a strong person. And she put them in their place and walked out, and we never ever had any more trouble again after that. So she's actually got more military service than I have, something like 17 and a half years.
Those incidents you were referring to, you want to talk about it that happened to Stella in Angola that caused her to get out quickly?
Well, she must probably shoot me, but she was a very fearless person. She had short blonde hair at that time. At roadblocks, she used to, the sisters tell stories where they were cowering in the car, and she would get out and bump the guy's AK and say, yes, and what do you want to do now? And they eventually, the word was out, they were calling her the White Witch. They were so scared of her. And anyway, the Portuguese army was still around, but not doing anything. They were sitting in their barracks, And she had a party. She decided her life's going to carry on, and she had a little apartment above her father's business. He had a business in town, a garage he had a few businesses. And her apartment was upstairs, and she was having a party, and two drunk, who knows who they were, MPLA or whatever, basically gate crashed the party, armed, demanding to be taken somewhere. And she said all these army guys, they were like running like scared rabbits, and she went up. Anyway, guy pulled a knife on her, and she, out of pure strength or whatever, she just grabbed it, managed to turn it, stuck it into the guy. He dropped. Other guy came for her, and she's a small girl, smaller than me, just out of pure force, pushed him over the balcony. He landed in the back courtyard on some of her dad's equipment there. So she took out 2 tours with her bare hands, this girl. Now, you must know why I don't mess with her too much. When she is angry, you do not want to be there. So that story, she has told it. Most probably can count it on my hands, and she'll only tell it after a few whiskeys and in the right mood and the right, audience.
But she got out. Then immediately after that,
Well, that's all there. It happened, and there's witnesses and so on. So it's out there. So I don't mind telling it now. We're old and we're safe in Australia. What are they going to do to us? You know what I mean? So and that because of that, that's where the next morning they realized, boy, this is trouble coming. So out she went.
So you got to know the Angolan Portuguese. What did you think of them? What did they feel when things went upside down there? What was your impression?
Well, they pretty bit and twisted. They were almost treated like second-rate citizens. It wasn't a penal colony sort of thing, but you had to be quite adventurous. Her dad went there as a young man. I saw the little town of Sapa Pinto grow. I didn't recognize it when I went back. They eventually built the international airport there, for starters. It was pioneering stuff, and her dad, he was a wealthy man eventually. He really built himself up, he had properties, he had a factory and also a garage. Built it with hard work, the locals, when her brother went back years later, he said in front of the governor, they were hanging on to him and saying, when are you coming back? When are you and your father coming back? This place is a shambles. But it's the old story, Our guys are good at building and there's others who are good at destroying. So it's just so sad. Huge potential. I mean, farming, obviously there are some minerals there, but just the farming. Stella's brother is an agronomist and he still raves about it.
Yeah.
He ended up growing coffee and all sorts of things. And he said it was the best, and it's sad to see it, because
there were some nice farms there. Eh?
Oh, absolutely. Down in south, there's some big cattle farms. The place is just so polarized now. The rich got so much richer and the poor and of course, they're going to miss it. That southeastern part, I mean, it's still, there's no infrastructure. There's no roads, or very little. There's only tracks. So it's, it's special. Was special.
Okay, back to the Air Force. Now you've done some time in Angola. You've flown Cessnas, and now you're going back to Runtu, I suppose, eh?
Yeah, we were doing Runtu, Katima, and Rhodesia, and also Windhoek. So we were the posts, and they were all great. They all had their fun bits, and the big thing is we were doing quite a lot of flying, so that was great. It was when you just got your wings, it's just hours you want. You fly at a moment's notice for any reason, so it was great. We got up a lot of hours compared to the rest.
What year did you go to Rhodesia? What year were you sent to Rhodesia?
72. So it was not long after my first tour. My first tour was Runtu, Angola. The next one was Rhodesia, and I think the very next one as well. And the reason why I remember is 72, 9th of April, I turned 21 and I was in Wanky. A very memorable party as well. It's quite a good hangover. So
and And the difference to, you'd gone to Angola, and now you end up in Rhodesia. What was the difference? What did you feel like?
Oh, big difference. Obviously in Rhodesia, the wars like on their doorstep. They're a lot more intimately involved. I take my hats off to the Rhodesians. That country was built in basically 90 years. But the spirit of the people was sky high. In the middle of sanctions, war on their doorstep. They were, their finger was on the pulse. Back at home, I can remember, 71, 72, telling people I'd come back. Half of South Africa didn't even know where Angola was in those days, early 70s. And Rhodesia was right on their doorstep. And I'll give you an example. Rutanga, when that Rutanga area opened up, we were just operating off the strip there out of tents, wearing, in Rhodesia, we flew in shorts and T-shirts and felt schooner. Within a day or so, the local farmers' wives slapped up a, pole and canvas hamburger hut. They weren't making money, that's for sure, man. They were practically giving away the stuff. And the Rhodesian food was way better than what we got in Namibia, I can tell you, or Southwest. So the food, was pretty good. And then on top of it, these local farmers did their bit. They treated their military really well, which was great. We did eventually as well, but I think we lagged a bit, to be quite honest.
Yeah. And the ops parts, were you just flying brigadiers around and generals, or what were you doing?
Well, again, in Rhodesia, that was similar stuff, a liaison, so to be all a mix of stuff, a bit of recce. I certainly remember, now I'm going back also to Katima. Story just cropped up recently with Dani Starboard, one of our guys that was in the Air Force with us, about flying the Roy Rus. Now, he was a security policeman, quite a well-known guy. He was in the Fox Street siege, and we did a few flights with him that were definitely illegal. And again, I don't know, I think the old man's passed on, but he did a few flights where he would ask us to take the door from the Cessna, and he would come along, a little canvas bag with some presents in it, and you'd be chucking him out. You could navigate from the air, just tell you where to go, left, right, and then head home. We could have caused international incidences then. I'm talking Zambia. Anyway, so we were doing that all over Rhodesia again, at what they called FAFs, forward airfields.
Yeah.
And then not long after that, I was pushing to get off Cessnas like everyone else as soon as possible. And that's the time I heard this new unit in Oudtshoorn, the Recce's has started. The rumor came to us that they were looking to get their own air wing. So, I'm a young bicycle, second loot, no problem. I phoned this Commandant Breitenbach. He wasn't as well known
Jan Breitenbach
as he is now. And I asked him about this. He said, yep, that's what they're working on, what they're hoping for. But anyone who comes down has to, to their unit has to do this thing called the selection course. And being young and dumb, I said, yeah, well, if that's what it takes, put me down, So I knew next I was down in Oudtshoorn, and we were an interesting course. We were only 5. And I was, of course, after Johan Burr-Dixon and Chris Cutter and guys like that.
Are you all pilots?
No, I'm the only Air Force guy. Oh. So there was one guy came from the prison services. There were 3 guys out of Namibia. They were all big friends. One was a guy called Bill Hagen, the lightweight heavy boxing champ, if I remember rightly. And Vermeulen and Coffee were black belt karate instructors, which means they were most probably fit. I was Air Force fit only. Anyway, I fuss baited. They had me running around those Swartberg mountains, up and down them. And of course, they already try to get you to work in teams or buddies, or they're looking for it. The guy from this prison service, he didn't last long, man. He was gone within a week or so. I can't even remember his name. And the other three naturally tended to try and do things because they were mates. So I sort of thought, well, you still have to do it. And I did I just carried on. I just did my own thing. This night navigation in the Swartberg Mountains. And there I got one of the biggest frights of my life. I walked into a donkey and that braying sound in the pitch black night. I'm not a plaasjapie. I'm a city boy. I nearly wet my pants that night. Anyway, then about the middle of our selection course, also we're doing quite a lot of shooting and stuff like it, a bit of mortars as well. The course that preceded us, that were quite a big course, that course of Johans. They were booked to go do the jumping course at the parachute battalion, which is not part of selection. It's that and diving and all the other things are add-on. And someone had the idea saying, we're a small group. It looks like we're doing okay. They're going to squeeze us in. So that was also a bit unusual, I think. So the four of us got squeezed in. And I was pretty tired. And anyway, so I thought, oh, this is great. This is going to be a break. And then someone said, no, there's still the PT course to come. I said, oh, man, how are we going to get through that? Because we were tired. They'd worked us. Anyway, by the time we arrived, apparently it had gone all the way up to Willem Ratte that we were exempted. Now, of course, there is a lover boy at the parachute battalion in those years. I think everyone would guess who it is. I don't know if I should name him. He had an English name anyway. And they started saying, oh, we must get yellow wings. We're going to pull our stomach muscles and all sorts of things. Anyway, neither of that happened. Our guys sailed through the course. I treated it as a recovery time. I got back to Oslo and carried on with the selection. And right at the end of the selection, one of the last few things you do is some sort of exercise in the woods in Neisner, that area. And we'd arrived there. Deelwald de Beer was there, I think, Yogi Potgieter, and I think Thijs van Vieren. I think were the instructors at that time. And we were just getting settled down, late afternoon, and we sort of knew what the program was for the next day, sort of being briefed. And some guy came out in a Land Rover. They didn't have radio comms or anything in those days. And he just said, hey, the Air Force reckon there's no ways the Army's getting their own toys. And they spend too much training this pilot. He needs to come back. I thought, okay, that's nice of you to tell me at the end of 2 months of getting fit. But I guess somewhere along the line, they realized, I was pretty keen. So I think it was the next course was on it. So, and off I went. And then two of the guys we had on that course got a Norris Crixus. So that was quite a good course. It was Dave Atkinson and Chris Milbank. So
you got your wings.
Well, then I got to Alouettes. I had my wings, but proper wings. So off to Alouettes, which was Cape Town and Bloem for training. That was 6 months, I think it was, and then 17 Squadron Swartkorps, and then down the line, I was pretty keen to get to Pumas, and they said, yeah, but you need to extend a short service. So I signed up for a medium service, which you could still cancel quite easily, 3 months notice, I think it was. And as soon as I did that, I got onto Pumas. So I squeezed Pumas out of it as well.
Now, what year was that?
That, Alouettes to Pumas would have been 76. And then when it came to leave, I always knew I'd leave sometime because I was thinking of the airline like most of the pilots, but I was having so much fun on helicopters. I thought, next year, put it off. And then when I got married, neither of us had much much in the bank. And then I decided, well, I'm going to apply for the permanent posting up at Ondongwa and put it through our command. But the major in charge, I do not mention his name, he's really a chopper boy as well, sadly. He didn't really push my case or do much about it. I'd done all the homework. I'd already sussed it out from the Ondongwa side. And it got me so irritated. I just came home one day and I told Stella, I said, that's it, I'm going to resign. So I resigned, 3 months notice, very sad. I didn't go look for a job first. But on my last day, I got, noticed that there was an opening and I started flying hillers on the Monday. So Puma on a Friday to a hiller on a Monday, believe me, is a big difference. It's a piston engine, old American training helicopter. But anyway, it was a great. But then one of the last flights I did was up at the border. It was a VIP flight, and the guy we flew was a guy called John Connolly. He was the guy sitting next to President Kennedy when he got shot. He was the governor of Texas at the time. And he was on sort of an election campaign, but he was on a look-see visit. So I ended up doing that job. And what we did, we flew a Puma up empty all the way up to Katima, and then that was to take him across to Doppies and then on to Oromega. I can't remember which one it was. And then it was on to Ondongwa, and it was, fact-finding, sightseeing, I don't know, but they rolled out the red carpet for that guy. And I think he was a Republican candidate. And so I went up, and they had kitted out a Puma only once before in VIP. It was like airline seats. And that was done for Hastings Banda in Malawi when he was doing his electioneering. And the crew that went up also spoke about that trip for months. They were very well treated, apparently. Anyway, so Hastings Banda, Malawi, got to use these seats. They put them in the stores. Next time they were used, quite a while later, was for this guy. So we put the chairs in, went up to Katima, and we got there afternoon. John Orr was the ops officer, a Mirage pilot. He came at us and said, hey, listen, they're expecting trouble tonight. Please, we're on standby. And we said, well, we've got seats in, but, we'll take them out. We did, and that's that night those 10 trippies were killed with those 122 rockets that came in.
So you were in Katima. You were in Katima when that happened.
Yeah, we were at the airfield, and then of course Jannie Breitenbach, all those guys were flown up. I think it was must have been the following night. I ended up taking them into the town. It was nighttime. And Blackie de Swart as well was there. He was the, sorry, my voice is going. He was the boss man in Namibia, or Southwest, I don't know why I call it Namibia now. He was in the pub, and Jannie Geldenhuys, he enjoyed the Air Force guys. He invited us in for a drink. And, it came out, that I'd resigned, and well, I hadn't got as far as telling them I'd resigned. I was telling the story how I couldn't get this posting. And the SWAT was saying, man, here's my direct number. You call me, I'm going to sort it out from my side. And then I had to tell him, I'm sorry, but that led me to resigning. I've only got 2 weeks left, or it was about 2 weeks. So who knows, I might have stayed on longer if the timing was better. But that was it. So that was quite a sad thing. It was just a lucky shot, that rocket.
When this attack happened in Katima, did you hear it? You were at the airport.
No. I don't remember hearing. Maybe we just slept too well, but I can't remember the distance. It's not that far. I'm pretty sure we should have heard it. Yeah. But there was certainly a lot of unhappiness, the guys, everyone was pretty shaken up. That was just a lucky shot, really.
Did you fly in to get them out, to get the bodies out, or was it?
No, that was all sorted out in the daytime. And then, this whole trip got rearranged then. So there was a follow-up. We helped with the follow-up, came back, put in the seats, went off. Then they switched this guy around. They sent him to Runtu, and we took him from Runtu into Doppies or Amiga. Now I've gone blank. Can't remember which one it was. For his visit, came back, did a bit of follow-up. We were playing musical seats for 2 or 3 days. The follow-up too wasn't the greatest. The guy running that was I didn't think it was the greatest. It should have been a lot.
Did they go
more,
did they go
more
over,
aggressive?
Did they go over into Zambia or not?
Well, that was the thing. They were reluctant, and then I think they did get some sort of clearance, and even then, it was too slow. That we were all itching to just get in there and go. And they were just overcautious. Whether they were still scared of the politicians or not, I don't know. The hot pursuit thing was still sort of new.
But the attack itself was done by SWAPO from Zambia onto the and it hit the two-piece mesa, and there were quite a few guys killed.
Yeah, it was. I remember seeing it was like a Plettenberg, those prefab. Man, that was flattened. That thing's flimsy. It's nothing to it, but it was just a lucky shot, basically a direct shot. And I think there were a few other misses there. I think there were quite a few rockets fired. And whether it was Zambians or SWAPO, who knows? But the Zambians must have known about it. They were all collaborating anyway.
Yeah. Now, before you left, you were involved in some way in that parachute airborne operation against Kasinga, hey?
Yeah, I was on this Kasinga op. Yeah, that was obviously quite an interesting one. It was postponed once. I think there was some sort of security leak. When it came off again, we all ferried up, staggered, and went, it's quite a way to go. And then, if I remember correctly, 13 Pumas and 4 Super Freelance. And we had to go in twice to get all the guys out. So they had this technique, I think, was still quite new, or maybe was a start, where we had these helicopter admin areas, HAG in Afrikaans, administrative gebied. So they had one, as I remember, it was about 15 kilometers southeast of Kasinga. And luckily or unluckily, I still don't know how to look at it. I was the reserve pilot. So we went into this, and they'd done this just off maps. They, decided on this area. It was pretty suitable. It was, enough to land a whole lot of helicopters.
No, that's where the choppers were kept while the ops was going on.
Yeah, so what we did, they laid a sort of rubber, we didn't use our ferry tanks, obviously. We just had, I think, some sort of rubber down on the floors, a whole bunch of drums, to be quite honest. I can't remember how many. So we all flew in, a whole bunch of fuel, landed. I had the protection element. It was a stick of parabats. So they stayed with us. The drums were kicked out. Some fuel was put in, because they needed that to get to the town and then back out. And then they refueled again in Ondongwa. And that was done twice, obviously, because of the number of people we had in. It was 360 something. So when those guys were called in to go do the pickup, and the day ran late, that ran behind schedule, we stayed behind. It's quite a lonely feeling. But we had our 10 guys, and of course we were armed. Nothing happened. Then they did their first drop off, came back, put in fuel again, picked up, and then we caught the tail end and came out. We ended up flying in the dark that night. Coming back, it was late. Very, quite a big, to fly 17 or 19 helicopters or whatever it was. That's quite a big formation. And we had our lights on because normally at night we never had our navigation lights on. But to space and so on, and we were fairly confident we weren't going to fly over anything. But we did, because not too far close, 5, maybe 10 minutes from the border, someone did open up. We saw the tracer. John Church was the formation leader. He told us to loosen up. The guys on the edge didn't have to be told. They were already 90 degrees. They were going their own way. I was somewhere in the middle of that formation. It's uncomfortable, I can tell you. Of course, we switched off our lights, but then realized that's not a good idea because, we could be flying into each other. So it was lights on, off, heads turning left, right. We were rubbernecks. And then, of course, a few minutes later, you realize that's it. We must have flown over those guys. What's our chances of flying over another one? And then anyway, the border was there and, we felt a lot more comfortable. Loosened up the formation. We landed, obviously thirsty, tired. And my very first recollection of walking into the pub that night was seeing Javi Winterbach, one of the Mirage pilots. They shaved and shampooed. And they'd had already quite a few beers ahead of us. And fighter jocks have this habit of using their hands, always demonstrating dogfighting or air combat maneuvering, as they call it. And there he was, exactly. So that was the start of that evening. There were a few bit of follow-up ops as well after that, the next day or so as well. I think to do with that camp we'd flown over, actually. And I was on that as well. There were two. I remember the one camp or scene we were called to. As we were coming in, the guys had told us, don't switch off because the staver pop was still hot. The food was hot. Fires were going. And they were worried about the guys zeroing in again with mortars or something. So we didn't switch off. I landed in front, a guy behind me. And they had a lot of gear they wanted taken out. So we said, just load as quick as you can, because if you hear one mortar, we out of here, They loaded pretty quick. And at some stage, I sort of glanced back, and it was all sorts of lots of medicine. I remember a lot, clothing, weapons. And I just heard my engineer swear. And I looked back and I could see straight away what had got his attention. It was one of those hand grenades, those sort of stick grenades. They look like a beer can, on a stick. That those Germans, they had them in the war, I think. And I don't know if it's true or not, but we knew them to be pretty sort of unstable or a bit like the Uzi, I think. And I just said, surely not, they've done this to us. And I just said, that's it, I'm out of here. And I just called lifting, but they were practically finished loading anyway. And the chopper behind me, he went basically through the same experience. So it was a very quiet flight. We didn't say much. The softest landing back at Ian Hana. Shut down those choppers just quietly, about 50 meters away were our drums. We sat down there. The guys who smoked, and I don't think anyone could even talk for 20 minutes or so. But we watched the troopies. We called it in and said, guys, we've got very suspect stuff. Those guys didn't give a damn, and they were emptying and collecting souvenirs. And we told them to be careful, but we don't think they were that careful. But nothing happened. We thought we were going to be the witnesses to a board of inquiry coming, but it didn't happen. So all interesting times. Yeah, that Kasinga was. I've managed to make one of the big reunions about 2 years ago with the Parabats in Joburg, and it was a good night. They're still very grateful, those guys.
Good guys, eh?
Yeah. yeah, the numbers are getting smaller, every year. But we're still pretty active here in Perth, at least. We keep the flame going. Yeah, and the Aussies love us. We go to any of the pubs, they just want to hear our stories. They never get tired of them.
But these experiences, flying in Angola, flying in Rhodesia, flying on the border, Ellos, Pumas, that's unique. I mean, Aussies, they haven't got a clue what it's really like, do they?
To be quite honest, they don't. I find them pretty nondescript. They're boring, to be quite honest. I can understand it up to a point. They're on an island. They sort of think they're invincible. I don't believe they are. They've got problems, Islamic problems and others. So they are starting to wake up. The average Aussies' life experiences are going to Bali. That's about it. I certainly try to educate guys. I've got quite a big library, and I've got a couple of guys started on reading some of the stuff, and they just come back, with questions and big eyes, and I just tell them, that continent I came from is a bit different to yours. It's brutal. There's some great stuff about it, but some of it's nasty. So I'm certainly educating a few of them.
Now, you joined in '69. That was, I remember as a kid when the first Mirages came. I think it was in '61. That was sort of our army, or our defense force was still small and inexperienced, and everything after that became bigger and bigger. You were still in the early days. How did you see it sort of expanding and developing? What was it like?
Well, it certainly, our guys just got better and better. We obviously adapted some of the stuff from Rhodesia, the Fire Force concept and that sort of thing. I also had a very interesting operation in about 76. I can't remember the name of it. I was still on Alouettes, right at the end of Alouettes. And the police task force had just been formed. And there was a group, a typhoon group or whatever, I'm not sure, that came through into the farming area. And I think for more political reasons, they decided they'll hand it over to the SAP. It was like
in South Africa or in Southwest?
In Southwest, sorry, in Namibia. So they came out of over the red line. This was a well-trained group. They were moving, and when they got over the red line, I think it was a political thing, but they said, okay, the police are going to handle this. So they flew up. I think it was 4 of us, 4 gunships, and they sent up 2 Pumas. So we had 4 K cars, and then we ended up getting split. And the group was, I think, something like 16 when they started. They had got odd contacts along the way. I seem to remember one did blow himself up going through a fence or something, a grenade caught. And I seem to remember that was one of the things. But they split somewhere near Otjiwarongo, and then they split us as well. So we were, the teams got split. Now this task force had they had a few Bushman trackers, and they had a stick of parabats, guys on call up, all Durban boys. One of them being Graham, what was his name? Moultrie, Gavin Moultrie. He just died about a month or so ago. I was still in touch with him down in Natal. And these guys were itching to go, and we were trying to sort of educate the cops. Rhodesian tricks, a line of flight. We could see where they were going. So put guys in front, cross track. They didn't really want to listen to us, They didn't. So it was frustrating because they would be tracking, pulled off in the afternoon, brought back, put back, maybe a different batch of guys on the tracks the next day. Whereas in Rhodesia, we know the guys would have tracked till they last minute, gone into ambush for the night, hit it again the next day and gain on these guys. They did finally put up an OP, and I like to think that they did sort of listen to us. And that was near a place called Amaruru, and it was a captain, one of their better guys, a guy called Shorty Reinecker, who sadly got knocked down by a bus a couple of months later in Pretoria. We'd ended up, and we were on the move. We were camping and doing whatever, the food trucks and what. They were hardly keeping up with us, but the locals were so good. They were looking after us. And in Amaruru, we were camping at the municipal swimming pool. And the Friday night, I remember we'd had quite a good party. I could go into detail there if you need some extra time. But anyway, early the next morning, we were sitting on the road, which was being sort of repaired at that stage. So there was a section we could use. And just waiting, near the police radios, and lots of waiting in this game. And then the radio suddenly got very live, and this Irongo mountain was a couple of kilos away from us. Shorty was up on the top there, and he said, I've got fire visual. They're walking right here between where we were and where he was. So we scrambled, and Ronnie Berta was my engineer. We just got up to height. We saw them. It was a turkey shoot in a way. And that was one of the times it led to developments later on with weapons. But the 20 mil in sand, it was a very sandy area. We could see these little puffs coming up close to these guys, and they were still running. We weren't getting the shrapnel effect. So basically, when they got hit, it was like direct hits. So those guys were a mess. I seem to remember 153 rounds in total. Whereas if that was Rhodesia, it would have been 10 rounds. The shrapnel gets the guys. So that was a mess. But then we got our group of 5, one hit. It was pretty quick, didn't take long. So that was the end of our op. And of course, a massive party that night. And that nearly led to a court-martial because we hijacked the Unimog to go to a party. And we stayed over. So there was a search party the next morning. It's a good story if you want to hear it. I think most of the guys won't get charged if it comes out now. It's one of the funny stories.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Well, what had happened the Friday night, we'd gone into the pub, of course. The locals were well aware there's something going on and see us. And this little pub in Amaruru had a boot, the big glass boot. So as a joke, we decided we've got to try it, order it, and the Air Force will always drink out of a cat, which is a beer mug. Who's ever there puts in 2 rand or whatever, and you just top it up, who's ever left. When the time came to pay, the barman said, no, that group of old folk there in the corner, they paying. So I said, oh, thanks, guys, and wave at them. And this happened 2 or 3 times. Eventually, we moved across, and it turned out one of them had a son at the border. One of the guys had flown Messerschmitt 262s, the jet during the war, of course, and we were off.
Yeah.
Really getting talking. And there was one of those nights, and then they said, look, guys, we'll do this proper tomorrow night. We're going to organize a good braai, and they gave us the address and a little map, which I stuck in my flying overall, and said, great, we'll see you there. That was the Friday night. Saturday morning was this call out, contact, over, and off we go, start the party. Keeping in mind now we're starting sort of the afternoon, and we still got this bride to go to in the evening. The people's name was Turbazing. I've never forgotten that.
Turbazing,
yeah, Turbazing.
German.
No, German, yeah, pretty sure. Anyway, at some stage, we also get told the mayor and they want to do some sort of civic reception. So we've got to go to that as well. And, that started dragging on also because the booze was free, typical of the guys. And I was starting to feel for these folk. And I said to Ronnie, told them we'll be there at 6 or whatever. And, this is already 7 o'clock or something. And I said, we need to go. And so we walked out of I said, how are we going to get there? And then we spotted the Unimog, one of the bats, with its keys in it, which they're not supposed to do. And it turned out to be also they'd stuck some weapons in there. And it had all sorts, food, and I think even some ammo. But that at least was undercover. But we thought they also know where they'll find out where the party is. It's a small town. And then we'll all come home. But we got to get there quick because we're holding up these good people.
Yeah, and the Unimog.
So off we go. Off we go, pulling into these people. They had such a spread, it was embarrassing. And none of the other guys ever made it. So here we are, these good people, they put, oh man, Irish coffees, and the sun that was at the border. And of course, we started partying. And at some stage, we'd apologized, the fact that these stinky overalls, we've been on the run and we haven't had much chance to do laundry. The old lady says, no problem, man, jump in the baths and showers. And, she's got some shorts and T-shirts of her son, spin dry, quick, no problem. He said, thank you. Off we go. Put on the gear, but then Ronnie notices the old lady's nightie, hanging on the back of the, in the bathroom. So he put that on as well. These folks, I mean, they took it so well. A good laugh. He has the guy in his, the girl's nightie, and we're trying to make up for the rest of the guys. It got to the stage they obviously just put us to bed. The son's room had two beds, but they had shutters as well. So they put the shutters down. And it was about 10 o'clock the next morning when we wake up with the sound of an alouette. So we stumble out because he's the guy in the other chopper. And it was John Robinson, the guy who was shot down in the Puma with General Earp's son later on in the Puma. What had transpired, he'd been told by J.C. Boer, the Mayot, Vlamgat, Raj pilot, to take the mayor and mayoress for a flip the next morning. But by the time of the next morning, he gets told, do the flip, but also go looking for a missing Unimog because there's a problem and there's a crew missing. So they're hoping we're together, which we were. Anyway, John found us very easily. And it was him buzzing the house that woke us up. So we stumbled out, into that bright light glaring, and we said, wow, it's John. Let's give him a brown eye. It was the Air Force thing we did.
Did you still have the nightie on?
I can't remember, actually. And at least we did it behind the Unimog so the old folk couldn't see it. So we give these guys the brown eye. And John says, oh, man, he said he saw what happened. So these guys are going to do what I think. And sure as hell we did. And he just banked away. But he said that both the mayor and mayoress had seen it for sure. Because, he'd been doing a tight turn. They didn't say anything, but he said they would have been blind. Anyway, we realized, man, we're in trouble because J.C. Bowe had said, hey, hit the road something like 7 o'clock. This is like 9, 10, somewhere there. These old folk gave us putt course that I think lasted for about a week. We loaded up, said, thank you. Gavin Moultrie was his Unimog. He was just so grateful. Well, I think it was his. But anyway, off we get told, get going. We need to get back to Grootfontein. Anyway, by the time we got going, the convoy had started, and the road that you follow is actually so straight between Sumer, Grootfontein, somewhere. There's a hell of a straight. You don't even have to navigate. You just fly off slightly parallel to it. So we're chugging along, and then we spot this Unimog, and we decide, we will give them a shoot up, So we came from behind in this Unimog, low. I can tell you, really low. And as we're on top of it, I recognized, I said, that's Gavin's. So now we're going to go even extra low. And obviously, as we're right on top of it, we notice he's sitting there, the guy with the major pips, blue pips, next to him was J.C. Bowe. We're already in trouble. And I said, well, now we're definitely in trouble. But we are going to get there ahead of him. Now, in those days, we had to write up reports, op reports, and so on. So I told Ronnie, I said, we are going to write the best flipping ops report they've ever seen, but we need to get our act together. Before those guys arrive, it's the old man's got to have, and that was Blackie de Swart. He was the Air Force boss, a colonel, but he was a navigator, but lovely old man, such a good old man. So we had this, I had recommendations, the guys had been using smoke, and I said, no, we need, again, I was copying some of the Rhodesian stuff, saying with heliographs and smoke wasn't working, circling guys couldn't, very practical, detailed. The old man was so happy. He still remarked, he said, this is a good report. But I hadn't told him, the trouble we made. Now, apparently when Boa came and tried to drop us, he sort of said, man, look at the results. The boys will be boys. They, it's a successful operation. That was the end of it. So we never got into the trouble we could have. So that, I can't imagine an Aussie doing a stunt like that, but the South African would.
Yeah, they would. They would.
And we got away with it. So,
yeah. Well, then, what happened then? You left the Air Force in '78.
Yep, end of '78, and started flying civilian. I started with crop spraying, which is different. Then I moved into game work, game culling for Kavisco, the biltong company, and then moved to the companies, worked my way through all the civilian types. Eventually, I ended up flying about 30 different types of choppers. So I got a good variety. And of course, at the back of, like most of the guys, I was thinking of the airline. And by the time I was ready, gone and did the civvy rating and wanted to apply, the airline had about a 6.5 year drought where they took in they didn't take in pilots. It was just at that time. And the end of that period, I was 35, which was the cutoff age. So there were a couple of us caught like that. Ralph Platter, the late Ralph Platter was one. So, we just carried on with what we were doing. I must say, I had a lot of fun. This airline gave you sort of regular work and security and all that type of thing, although you wouldn't say that looking at it now. South African Airways is a disaster. But, and then, of course, still would have flown choppers in between. But, I stayed with it and got to see the world, most of Africa, had a few minor incidences along the way, but walked away from them. So the worst being a crash in Papua New Guinea in '91. I had a 100-foot of cable whiplash up through the rotor, so that was pretty ugly. But it gave me my first visit to Australia. I was flown to Townsville Hospital, so spent 3 weeks there.
What happened in that crash?
I'd been slinging. They sling a lot because of the jungle there, which is loads underneath the chopper, and even down to water. You're picking up water out of lakes and rivers and that for the guys in these little fly camps. But your load will change, your job changes all the time. And I'd landed in a big marshalling yard between like a valley of pipes. That's an oil drilling project I was on. And the guy on the radio obviously was a local. And, it's frustrating, as trying to understand guys on the radio, because what my next job was, I can release the cable, but we only release it if we know it's not going to be needed. And they were still trying to decide what I had to do next. There was weather then. The weather there is pretty treacherous. The cloud base was literally coming down. I was up on the edge of a mountain. And I was telling them I'm going to have to go make the decision because, if I can go without the cable on, I'm quick and easy. But if I keep the cable on, I've got to climb up first. I've got to get the height, make sure it's underneath me before I go. And it was getting close. And, I got a bit impatient. So accidents are a series of things. And so I got going, and then I just started edging into the cloud, turned it, already picking up speed. And, I thought I better start going down now. But now I'm also on the downslope. And obviously I just did it a second or so too soon. And with my turn, we think this thing looped, hit this valley, the pipes, because there was a mark, and there was a very basic fence behind me, just not professionally done or anything. I think the locals. And the cable had a steel D-shackle at the end of it, and that sort of went around the wire, like whipped around it, must have got a grip. And this is the theory, anyway, what we think happened. And then, like a catty, it ricocheted, it picked up tension and then let go, which we didn't think a steel cable would do. And that shot up through the tail rotor, so tail and main rotor. If you see helicopters, photos of that helicopter, you would not believe someone came out of it. It was a Hughes 500, like the old Magnum helicopter, and that thing was destroyed. The whole front nose is cut off. So I bust my arm, leg, jaw, and nose. I was lucky, and they got me to the local hospital, which was pretty third world, but they had me medevac from there to Australia. So yep, I came home, and arm and leg in plaster, and flew not long after that with my leg still in plaster. I actually even did some instruction. There was nothing in the air law that I could still handle the controls. So when my arm was fixed, because I had another operation later on the ankle, I just carried on flying. No problem. I had very understanding students, I think.
Did you ever get lost?
Oh, too many times. Oh, man. Lots and lots.
The Army Air Force?
Oh, yeah, no, mainly there. Hey, look, later years, of course, we had GPS. I take great pride, though, in the fact that we learned to map without a doubt. I did 2 state presidents' air races as a navigator, and we won it. Standard of, compared to the civies, we cleaned them out. It was, but of course, now GPS, but even GPS can get misused or missed, if you put in the wrong coordinates. But yeah, certainly a couple of times. But we always said we never got lost. We were just uncertain of position. And then, of course, some places you can land and find out where you are. But yeah, certainly a few times. But never, running out of fuel or anything, not that bad. So, yeah.
Now, the SP Air Race, what was that?
State President's Air Race. It's now called the President's Trophy Air Race, I think. I can't remember how. I think 100 people or so. It was a lot of guys. We did it out of Tempe in Bloemfontein. It was just a lot of fun.
But what is it?
It's a race, but it's also on navigation. And but the turning points, they were like little towns and most of your towns in the Free State have got a silo or something. I was not impressed with the average civvy navigation. I found it reasonably easy, to be quite honest, and I'm not boasting, but it was. And they still, the civvies were getting a couple of them, not all of them. And there were a few guys right behind us. And again, that leads to another naughty story if you need to hear that one.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I win this race with a young kid out of Johannesburg, that big plant hire equipment company called BLC Plant. I taught basically the whole family to fly. The son is Luigi Stravino. And they decided, basically the company sponsored it, so we did it. We win it, we get back to Tempe, and it's quite eerie because they asked us to, when you get back, do your refueling and get out of the way, so we don't get too much congestion at the fuel pumps. And there was like nothing around us. So I asked the fueling guy and he said, hey, no, you guys, you are the first. But, he was an old hand. I said, that's great. We, again, typical Air Force, we start a party. And that year, the Air Force had put in an Alouette. And, we were having a few beers with him and others. And it was the days before when you still had the old cameras with spool in it and so on. The guy had his camera there, and he left his camera behind. Now, of course, we Einsteins with all the beer we got in us, but he's gone home like all of us to go and get dressed and change and come back for the prize giving. So I grabbed the camera and I told Luigi, come with me, and we went to the Western End there late afternoon. It's very rude, the story, so maybe you need to censor it. But I told him, drop your rods. I took a close-up photo of his private, part. And to make it fair, I said, it'd be better. I got to do my bit as well. So I dropped my rods, took a close-up of a brown eye. And I said, okay, here's what we do. You give this camera to your girlfriend. Don't say anything. Just make sure he gets it. He'll be very grateful, which he was. And don't say anything. So this guy gets this camera and obviously carries on with the rest of his photos. About 6 months later, maybe even more, I'm walking up the hangars there, Lancero going up for lunch or something. And, when the guy's like 50 meters away and you start giving each other that look like we sort of know each other, we've met somewhere. And we stop and we get chatting. And when we work it out, he says, it was at the State President's Air Race. And I just started smiling. And the guy said to me straight away, he said, it was you, wasn't it? By that stage, I was just laughing. I said, yeah, I think I know what you're onto. I said, but I'm not going to tell you. Is who's the brown eye and who's it is. So that part I never let on. But, boys will be boys. And I'm sure I'm not the first who's pulled a stunt like that. But it's a typical Air Force thing. That don't do it. You're asking for trouble.
You said something, SAA is a disaster. Why do you think is that? Or let's start with the old SAA. What was it like? If you're looking back now and compare it to other airlines?
Well, I had so many friends. A lot of guys on my pilot's course went to airline. In fact, one, Don Pengeli, he's living here in Perth. So, it was a fantastic airline, had great reputation, high standards. Obviously, in the later years, they started getting competition, which I think was only good from all the other airlines. But Dudu Moyeni and these other clowns, they've run it into the ground. I don't think you can measure the damage or the cost they've done, and it's dying. They're trying to keep it going. I think with 88 pilots, whereas they must have had 1,000, I'm sure, at some stage. It's sad that the country is mismanaged. It breaks your heart to watch it, and like everything else, your Escoms and Transnet, the list, as you know, is how long. I've got to be careful sometimes saying these type of things because people think I'm running it down because I'm not there. They don't understand that I feel for it. Our son's there, your family, my grandson. So you still feel for the place, and it still irritates me when I see them doing it.
It's tragic. That's what it is. It's tragic.
It's a tragedy, absolutely.
Yeah. And then another thing you said, which I don't know. You said DCC when you told us about Stella and the Goldstone Commission. Does it mean the Congo? Was he involved in the?
Oh, no. DCC was Directorate Covert Collection.
I see.
So the CCB and there were all sorts of spin-offs from that. Also, I'm trying to think of the brigadier who ran it, Toliki. Is it Toliki? He's died, and there's a book out on him, not particularly well written. So I made a point of reading that. They did good work. It was a military intelligence thing, and obviously they tried to.
Now, without compromising anyone, without being funny, what exactly was this about, this DCC? You said they did good work, but what did they do and what did they achieve?
To be quite honest, I generally know what I know out of books. Stella she's a fantastic keeper of secrets. She still does not let on. I've worked out, she's done some really interesting trips, and maybe one day she'll write it down. But I must say her main job was languages, obviously being Portuguese speaking. She speaks 7 languages in total. So, in amongst that's French, but she also knows German and Spanish. So Spanish for the Cubans, German for the East Germans. So she was used a lot in translating. And she also did some broadcasting with a professor that was sent out on UNITA's free radio or whatever, possibly even the Mozambicans, I think. That professor, I think, still alive, so I better not mention his name. He wrote a lot of the stuff, and Stella translated it and did the recordings at the SABC. They were flown up, and the transmitter was somewhere, I don't know, in the bush. So she did quite a mix of stuff. And got to know a lot of the early recce's, which was in General Lurtz's office. Early days, they were coming through. I wish she should write a book. It would be interesting. I might have to.
Now, these radio stations.
Nice.
These radio stations were one for Mozambique and one for Angola, or the UNITA.
I think there was also later on Mozambique, but it was the one UNITA's sort of radio. That she did pre-recorded stuff that was put out, and that carried on for a while, but also it stopped or died eventually. She did do a bit of in Angola, also some broadcasting there. So she had a bit of experience, having done that previously. But it was, all scripted.
You said, you told me earlier on, at some stage you got guys together there where you are now, and everyone had to tell a funny story. Maybe you can remember one or two of them from the old days.
Well, it was, I live on 5 acres, and our vets organization is pretty active, and it's one of the things that helps keep us sane, I think. And I built a boma, and we've had odd guys visits and reasons, and one of them being Chris Murcroft was his daughter's, and I think it was his visit. But now it's become a rule. We'll pick a theme, and the theme the night he was there was at the boma was we all had to tell a story, and it had to be the most memorable or the funniest of your military time. And look, it was a late night. It was so much laughter and so much just huge fun, and then since then we keep it going, similar sort of themes. But the first one was the best. I think it was just.
Tell us about it.
And I can really only remember my story, and it had to do with Bucky Smith, who was on our pilot's course, a character of note, sadly also no longer with us. Now Bucky's came from the Air Force as a discipline corporal. He was lucky if he could speak 10 words of English, and in the Donata, Air Force in their wisdom gave him a pilot instructor that I think was lucky if he could speak 10 words of Afrikaans. So, he had to battle along, and Tony, what was his name? I've forgotten. It'll come back to me. Anyway, at one of our reunions, he told us the story. Now, and he's one of the guys, I give him credit, he could laugh at himself. And he said they were doing their navigation exercise early days, and how it's done, you each have the same maps marked the same. The instructor will point out stuff. He would say, 2 o'clock position, 10 miles away. Can you see that little copy with the trig beacon on? Yes, Lieutenant, thank you. I can see that. Yeah, your 9 o'clock position, 5 miles, Guard Road, 2 T junctions coming. Yep, he's got that. 2 o'clock, 10 miles, you might see a railway bridge. Yep, he's got that. And then it gets to an S bend in the river. Yeah, you know, again, who knows, 11 o'clock, 5 miles. He says to Bucky's then, can you see which way that river is running? And Bucky's, you know, he said, oh, man. Now, he's got to translate this into Afrikaans, work it out, come up with the answer, translate back and tell this guy. And he said, you know, and now this guy's getting impatient. Oh, and this instructor, by the way, was one of the nasty ones. He used to pull out the stick. The instructor's stick can come out. And some of them used to do it, hit you on the head from behind and put it back quickly, obviously, because, you know, then he's out of control for those few seconds. He was one of those guys. So Bucky's was waiting to get smacked, and so he had to say something. But in the meantime, to help him, this instructor had said, just look at the tributaries. That'll give you an indication. It's like the quivers on a arrowhead, you know, when you think about it. And Bucky said, you know, now he's got to think of running water and running rivers and which way and you know, and tributaries. So he finally says, Lieutenant, I see lots of willow trees and thorn trees, but no tributaries. That's just it's a classic, you know. It's just one of them. There's so many. You know, I think hard. And there were others. You know, Phil Meredith throwing a thunder flash into the fighter pilot's terrapin up at the border. You know, that was another good story. Do you want to hear it? It's not. I wasn't there, but Phil Meredith was you know, Puma pilot as well, and you know, when the fighter pilots came into the war, it was quite late. You know, we'd been fighting the war for years when they started. You know, they were based up there, and they place had improved. In my time, we were in tents, and now they had these little terrapin cabins. Apparently, this is after I'd left, and someone had sent the guys a watermelon somehow, and you know, the guys were always making trouble with the fighter boys because they would go to bed early. You know, they can't have a few beers and pull G the next morning. Well, helicopter guys can only operate if they've had a few beers. So they get this, mount this operation. The one evening they've got this watermelon. They've made a little hole in it. They've worked out one guy's going to open the door, one guy's going to hold this watermelon, one guy's going to stick that thunder flash in. Team effort, worked beautifully. Door open, things already lit, rolled in the watermelon, closed the door, and of course they decorated that room. It became pink. The mosquito nets caught a lot of the, you know, watermelon pips, blew out the windows, and they forgot a part about the hearing, the eardrum. So about the next week, you had to shout at the fighter boys because they were a bit deaf. Anyway, of course, you know, they were in trouble. The next morning on Colonel's red carpet, they had to go find the putty and the glass and fix it and whatever else they had to do, and warned you, leave those guys alone. Don't mess with the fighter pilot. Well, fair enough. The next night, they left them alone. The very next night, back up to their own tricks again. This night, they decide to, you know, they also had a bit of a garden going since my time there, even with the lawnmower. They had the lawnmower up on the roof, and they were running up and down, mowing the roof. And apparently, the blaze was set just about the right height to hit, you know, it would be a matter of ting, 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 tick, you know, as they were hitting the odd bolts. And a mighty racket, of course. And at some stage, Phil said, you know, he also had to relieve himself. This was hard work. Some guy happened to come charging out. It was a new guy, and he was senior in rank. So guess what? Next morning, back on the red carpet. It never ended. Guys, you could write a book on, there must be hundreds of stories like it. But that I can certainly visualize, you know, I can see it happen in my mind's eye, you know. Fun.
So a lot of them are now there where you are now. A lot of them have gone.
Yeah,
Australia.
Perth is full of South Africans, Rhodesians. There's biltong shops. Now, obviously, you tend to gravitate to your own. So my doctor's South African. He done time up at the border. Well, Ernst Iselin. My dentist is a South African. Even the chemist stuff. Got a chemist now that's, so you tend to support the guys. And, they generally look after each other. A lot of Facebook sites, they help people coming in. Lots of help, input, if you've got questions. So, yeah, and then, of course, the Vets Association, Samvoa, it's called. They've got branches all over Aussie, but Western Australia, I think we're the ones that have the most fun. You can see it, from our social calendar, the stuff we get up to. Not this weekend, the following weekend, we're doing our yearly trip to the beach. On the beaches, you can still drive, camp out, make a bonfire. Actually, no, we can't this time. We're still in the burn season. But yeah, we just have a swim in the sea, sit around, drink beer, and come back the next morning. But it's chill out time. It's just a lot of fun, and again, lots of laughs. Always laughing, which is important.
Lots of them still got family and roots in South Africa.
Yep, yeah, absolutely. And that's why I say we still keep our finger on the pulse. We still feel for the place. It still hurts. Stella worries endlessly about our son and grandson. Sadly, he's had a bad divorce, so he is stuck there because his ex, doesn't see the value of getting out. So our grandson is stuck there. So, the mother, grandmother worries twice for both of them. And there's nothing we can do about that situation because, our son won't leave without his grandson. So, so until he's 18 or whatever, so that's another 8 years. It's sad.
You've been back?
Yep, I've been back 3 times actually. Went twice. No, what am I saying? Twice. I went back for. I did a fantastic safari. My last flying job, I did 11 countries, 66 day in 2018. Went through Angola as well, all the way up to Rwanda. 100 hours of flying in a jet Ranger. It was a German guy and his girlfriend. He did a book on it. It's also on the net. Fantastic trip. Very interesting. We only did southern Angola. Met up with a guy called Stefan van Wyk. This guy had a theme on this trip. It was all about water. And Stefan put us on to what the Chinese are up to with all the water flowing into the Okavango swamps. Was really interesting. If those Chinese go ahead, it's going to take all the water from the swamps. It's going to have huge implications. Anyway, I'm hoping that still gets good publicity because something needs to be done about it.
Now, what is Angola? You were there in the good old days when the Portuguese were still there before the war, basically. Well, the war still started, but it was still good. Then the war came and you saw it then, and now you're going back in 2018. What was it like then?
It was sad. We only did the southern bit, so we went through Aangebied. Well, the airport there, the terminal building is all beautiful and new, but already a few odd things not working. Huge attitude problem. Of course, they try and milk you. But our contact, Stefan, sorted that out. Then Monongwe had grown. Our house was open felt in front. It's basically like squatters now. Our old house, Stella's old house. We still make it out. They basically there, certain things have changed, like wall in front, and but run down, grown. In fact, there was even a Checkers there, and that was more a village when I was there last. Certainly could still see a few landmarks, the the governor's palace and so on. The most interesting, of course, was Quito, because we camped across the river. Again, Stepan, he's in with all the right people, just near the bridge, the famous bridge, just north of that. So we're looking across the river at Quito, and they've built a magnificent runway, airport, terminal buildings, and they're lucky if they get an aircraft in 2 weeks. In fact, there was no one even in the control tower, and quite a big, impressive museum, monuments, typical Russian style, and big, huge, like big circular statues, modern building, and Roland de Vries had been there with a tour of guys, literally like a few days. I just missed them. It would have been so nice to have been there at the same time. So a whole lot of, we went to the tanks that got left there. And in fact, right next to where we were camping was like a graveyard. Must have been an old workshop. There were about 10 tanks lying there, completely stuffed, But the South African tanks, they've turned like into monuments. So all Roland's little crosses and that were still there. But there's just no activity. There's no tourism, or very little. And of course, it was quite interesting flying down the Quito again. And the guy got some pretty good footage. Pity he didn't do the book in English. I thought he still might toy with it, because he pretty much financed a lot of it. So it's in German. But we got some fantastic photos. Took about, I think, 80,000 photos. So he had a lot of editing to do. It was a great trip, though. And Rwanda was interesting. No litter, and a safe. You can walk around there at night. You don't feel at all like you do in Joburg. And no litter. The place is spotless. Just they run it very, very tight. Those generals, those military guys. Airport security at the airport in Kigali was unbelievable. The tightest I've ever seen. You don't move there. They don't.
No, this is Rwanda, Central Africa.
Central Africa, yeah. We had an unscheduled stop in Burundi. I picked up a minor electrical problem and decided to land. So I can say I went to Burundi as well, although it wasn't official. We didn't tell anyone. We just carried on. So, But we incidentally spotted Chinese in every single of those countries, including Burundi. And right where I landed, there was like a whole village, like a housing estate, even Chinese architecture. So they in Africa deep. The guys need to wake up to that as well. I saw it in Angola already when I was working in Cabinda. I worked in Cabinda for quite a few years. In fact, right the camp where Bernard du Toit was captured. And we've had him here as our guest about 3 years ago. So I told him all about that part. That camp, we were told by the guys that were there, was on high alert. They knew those guys were coming.
That's when they got, two got taken
Captured.
out and he was captured, yeah. Tell me, how do the Angolans see the Chinese? You said something about they're everywhere. How do they see the Chinese and us now, 20 odd years after the war? No, longer, 30 years after the war.
Well, the interesting thing is we were flying, working with guys that were on the opposite side. We actually got on surprisingly well. And that was a mystery to all. We had so many different nationalities there. And we never went into it too deeply. One of the guys I was with, his brother got shot down in a hind. Never found him. He never came home. We actually got on surprisingly well. They quite often would ask us, or quite often myself, to bring them a book. It would be a certain book on our war. And I remember asking them one day, why aren't they writing the stories as well from their side? And the guy's reply to me was, "Oh, their generals aren't interested. They're just too busy making money." And I said, "It doesn't have to be a general to write a story." But they were certainly, some of them, pretty clued up, and they knew which books they wanted to read. So they had a far better idea from our perspective. But the caliber wasn't the greatest. One of their pilots there, we started together. It was when they started up a new company called Heli Malonga, and they reckon he was their top MiG pilot, but he was flying helicopters. And I flew with the guy. He's very capable. He was very good. In fact, I rated him above some of the other pilots we had, some of the Americans. So that was interesting. But things like that type of thing, where we noticed it. And the first Chinese coming in that was after Chinese had given Angola a $5 billion soft loan when the oil price was high. And the next thing, these guys are in, but the guys we first saw were like scared rabbits. They scrawny, they looked undernourished. And, with a bit of debate, we came out to the conclusion that they've emptied their jails. These are jailbirds. The next thing, they built a hospital in Cabinda. They've given them the loan, but their guys are doing the work. You could see the Chinese, with their scaffolding, with bamboo, no health and safety regulations. They just, there they were. And then they were all over. And about 6 months later, you saw the guys with the briefcases, the Chinese. So they were doing a big rice project as well, south of Cabinda, of the airport. But those guys, yep, I'm pretty sure they were jailbirds, and they must probably going to be dumped and never even brought home again.
And how do the Angolans see it?
Well, they would sort of mumble and grumble, but nothing's going to happen. Certainly, the guys we talking to, which is just pilots, they just accept too many things. They don't take them on. They're not civil-minded, civic-minded like we are, I guess. They blasé, so be it.
Are they good for Angola, you think? Chinese?
I don't think so. No. I don't think that the Chinese have got an agenda and they've got a plan. It's a 50-year plan or whatever. Even Australia needs to wake up. Go look at the map. They've got all this land mass just north of you. Is a massive population growing in India, Indonesia. They must be looking at the land mass of Australia and thinking, well, the Israelis can grow stuff in the desert. It's going to come to food. We're going to have to feed people. That worries me, I tell you. But no, I don't trust them. Straight on.
But we don't know what's going to happen, eh?
Well, I worry about. I only had sons, now I've got a granddaughter, so I think of her and I think, oh man, what society is she going to have for that? And I certainly couldn't see her in South Africa. I'd be a vigilante, and Stella would beat me to it, I think. So yeah, she at least, she's relatively safe. You can walk the streets at night, for the time being at least. So yeah.
Slade, thank you very much for coming on. I really do appreciate it. And it was a look into the early days when the war was starting. And it's interesting that you met your wife in Angola, eh?
Yeah, and I say a lot of the early stuff, your old battalion as well. In fact, we were there at the birth almost, because I remember one of her jobs was, we were still courting, as when a lot of the early guys were flown in for medicals. They were flown in by C-130s at night. It was all done at night at MMI. So that must have carried on for about a week. And I remember taking her in the evenings and fetching her in the mornings. She worked throughout the whole night, with helping with translating and that. So those early 32 guys, FNLA or whatever they were, because of her language, again, was there helping with the processing. So they did their medicals. They went through all proper medicals and things. And that was basically the birth of 32. You know, that's also in the books now. So she was there pretty much from the beginning, you know, so involved with them.
Yeah, you've led an interesting life, and I wish you well, whatever happens in the future.
Well, when someone came to interview you the guys led the interesting life. In fact, I still reckon you there's a bit of insanity in that mix, but certainly a very brave man. So I count myself blessed to know you. You command a huge amount of respect, by the way.
The emphasis on the insanity.
Oh well.
Ja. Slade, baie dankie. En en hou ons vlag hoog daar in Perth.
Ja, sal so doen.
Ja, en all the best.
Ja, dit was 'n plesier vir die ouens my Afrikaans is bietjie uit oefening. But well done guys. Keep it up and don't let them get us down too much. And Willem, you go well, and all the old soldiers and whoever gets to hear this and listen to it, I hope they enjoy it. Hope we didn't ramble on too much.
Thank you, Slade, and baie dankie.
My throat's going dry. I need a beer.
Ja. En so kom ons tot die einde van nog 'n om die kampvuur. Lekker slaap luisteraars.